My name is Sarah, and my life changed drastically after my father's death. My father left behind a small architectural firm, an apartment building, and an inheritance of $3 million. But my brother's wife, Kathy, was under a very grave misunderstanding. She thought she could easily take control of everything my father had built and saved. What she didn't know was that my father and I had made sure everything would be safe from her greedy hands. Please don't worry. We'll take over the $3 million inheritance and the apartment buildings left by your father, Kathy said confidently, her smile almost mocking as she stood before my father's portrait. She looked as if she had already won, but little did she know how wrong she was. Until she realized her mistake, I decided I would wait patiently. I wasn't going to let everything my father had worked for fall into her hands. I work at my father's architectural firm. I'm 45, unmarried, and I've been devoted to this company since I graduated. Growing up, I always admired my father's work, which inspired me to study architecture and design. After graduating, I joined his company, working alongside him to grow the business. My father had designated me as the next manager, and the employees trusted me. My older brother, on the other hand, never had any interest in the business. He majored in liberal arts, and I knew he wouldn't be involved in the company's future, which was fine by me. My brother, Mark, was always the free spirit of the family. While I spent my youth learning the intricacies of architectural design, he traveled the world, pursued different hobbies, and never seemed to settle down. When he finally did get married in his early 40s, Kathy became a part of our lives. Kathy was sharp, assertive, and always seemed to have an agenda. She didn't understand why I was so invested in the company. To her, my life seemed dull compared to the glamorous adventures she and Mark experienced. One evening, after I finished work and returned home, Kathy showed up unexpectedly. Her harsh words filled the house as she demanded to know where my father was. "Don't depend on your parents and live a sloppy life, Sarah," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. She had always criticized me, believing I relied too much on my father. She even called me a burden on society because I didn't have children. But I knew the truth. Kathy had her own issues. She couldn't have children due to a past illness. I never used that against her, but it didn't stop her from belittling me at every chance she got. That night, she left without much explanation after learning that my father would be late. Her visit had felt odd, but I brushed it off. I had more important things to focus on, like the growing concern for my father's health. He was 75 and still working late nights. I wished he would take it easy, but he was always dedicated to the business. A week later, everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in a meeting with a client discussing a new project when my phone began to vibrate insistently. I glanced at the screen and saw the name of one of our employees, Thomas. I excused myself and answered the call. Thomas's voice was frantic. "Sarah, it's your father. He collapsed at work. The ambulance is on the way." My heart sank, and the room around me seemed to blur. I immediately wrapped up my meeting, apologized to the client, and rushed out of the office. My hands trembled as I dialed my brother's number. Mark picked up after a few rings, and I explained the situation. He promised to come quickly, but when I called Kathy, her response was indifferent. "Do I need to go there?" "You're there, aren't you, Sarah?" she said, as if my father's critical condition was an inconvenience to her. When I arrived at the hospital, I found my father unconscious, surrounded by medical staff. The doctors were doing everything they could, but I could see it in their eyes. Things weren't looking good. 2 hours later, my father passed away quietly. He was 75. There wasn't even time to mourn as we had to arrange the wake and funeral. My brother, who should have taken on the role of the chief mourner, seemed clueless and detached. "Did Dad have any special illness? His passing seemed so sudden," he asked, as if he hadn't noticed my father's declining health over the years. It was heartbreaking to see how little attention he had paid. Kathy, of course, was no better. She refused to help with anything, disappearing to the back whenever she could. I handled everything: the attendees, the funeral home, the company. It was exhausting, and her indifference only made it worse. My aunt, my father's younger sister, tried her best to support me, but the burden was heavy. During the first week of mourning, Kathy finally revealed her true colors. She approached me and my aunt with a smug look on her face. "Shall we get started on the inheritance? My husband is the eldest son, so the $3 million in that apartment are rightfully ours," she declared, her voice dripping with entitlement. My aunt and I exchanged surprised glances. How had she even found out about the bank book, which was locked in a safe? I took a deep breath and calmly explained, "Kathy, there is no inheritance left for my brother to receive." Her face turned red with anger. "What do you mean?" "There's no way there's nothing. Are you trying to trick me?" she yelled, her voice echoing through the room. I explained that the company had been legally transferred to me, and the apartment had been given to my aunt as a lifetime gift from my father. My brother had received a substantial amount as a lifetime gift, which he had already spent. There was nothing left for her to claim. Kathy's reaction was explosive. She knocked over a vase that had belonged to my mother, shattering it along with glasses on the table. What was supposed to be a gathering to honor my father's memory turned into chaos. Eventually, my brother and other relatives managed to calm her down, but the damage was done. Her true nature had been exposed for everyone to see. The days that followed were a blur. I focused on the company, trying to keep everything running smoothly despite the turmoil at home. My father's absence was deeply felt, not just by me but by everyone at the firm. He had been a pillar of strength, and now it was up to me to fill that void. In the end, my brother filed for divorce. He confessed that after seeing her obsession with money, he was scared to stay with her. Surprisingly, Kathy agreed to the divorce quickly once her past criminal record for marriage fraud was brought up by the lawyer. I was relieved to sever the family ties with her, though I couldn't help but worry about my brother's poor judgment. Life at the company moved on, and I took on the role of president and CEO. It was a heavy responsibility, but one I was ready to carry. My employees looked up to me, and I was determined to protect everything my father had built. As I handed my business card to a visitor, the title, President and CEO, printed on it, I felt a sense of pride and resolve. "Dad, I swear I will protect this company," I thought to myself, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The months that followed were challenging, but also rewarding. I had to make difficult decisions, restructuring the company, cutting unnecessary expenses, and finding new projects to keep us afloat. The economic climate was tough, and there were times when I doubted myself. But every time I felt overwhelmed, I remembered my father's words. "A good leader never gives up. They find a way, no matter what." Those words became my mantra. My brother Mark tried to rebuild his life after the divorce. He moved into a smaller apartment and found a job teaching at a local community college. We spoke occasionally, and while our relationship was never as close as it could have been, there was a sense of understanding between us. He admitted that he had made mistakes, marrying Kathy, ignoring the family business, and taking everything for granted. It wasn't easy for him to say those things, and I respected him for it. One evening, a few months after the dust had settled, I received a call from my aunt. "Sarah, I found something you should see," she said, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and urgency. She asked me to come over to her house, and I left work early to see what it was about. When I arrived, my aunt handed me an old, worn-out notebook. "This belonged to your father," she said. I opened it, and as I flipped through the pages, I realized it was my father's journal. He had written about his dreams for the company, his hopes for me, and his concerns about Mark. The entries were heartfelt, and reading them brought tears to my eyes. My father had always believed in me, even when I doubted myself. He had known that I was capable of taking over the company, and he had prepared me for this moment my entire life. The journal became my source of strength. Whenever I faced a tough decision, I would read a few pages, and it felt like my father was still guiding me. I shared some of the entries with the employees at the firm, and it brought us closer together. We were no longer just coworkers. We were a family, united by my father's vision. Kathy, on the other hand, disappeared from our lives. The last I heard, she had moved to another state, trying to start over. Part of me felt sorry for her. She had always been chasing something she could never have. But I knew I couldn't let her or anyone else jeopardize what my father had built. One day, as I stood in the office looking out at the city skyline, I felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I knew I was ready for whatever came next. My father had given me the tools I needed, and now it was up to me to use them. The company was thriving, the employees were motivated, and I was proud of what we had accomplished. "Dad, I hope you're watching," I whispered, a smile forming on my lips. We did it. With that, I turned back to my desk, ready to tackle the next challenge, knowing that I was never truly alone. My father's legacy lived on, not just in the company, but in me, and I would protect it with everything I had. And so, the story continued, not just my story, but the story of everyone who had been touched by my father's work. It was a story of resilience, of standing up against greed, and of finding strength in the face of adversity. And as I moved forward, I knew that no matter what happened, my father's spirit would always be by my side, guiding me every